All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, taking a little bit of time out of your first week back at school after Thanksgiving break. Um, Thanks so much for joining us. We'll give folks just a second to get their headphones hooked up and settled in with their evening cup of tea or whatever your last slice of pie from Thanksgiving, whatever you might have with you. And then we will dive right into our session on simulations with CFR Education. So glad you're here tonight. My name is Charlie Hopkins. I'm the Managing Director of Teaching and Learning at the Council on Foreign Relations. Been here working on these simulations for over 6 years. And that comes after a decade of teaching high school social studies and using all kinds of simulations and active learning activities there. So excited to be talking about this with all of you tonight. So let's dive in. Our plan for this evening, we're going to be a tight half hour because I know you all have lots to do. Um, Speak very briefly about CFR Education, what it is, what we do, and then we'll get started with our extended simulations, our multi-day project-based learning experience, and we'll take a little bit of time there talking about how to run the role play, sort of the in-person discussion portion, which I think can sometimes be maybe the most daunting part of this, but shouldn't be. We'll talk about some of the tools we have for that. Then we'll move on to our mini simulations, which are just like extended simulations, but shorter, which is really great depending on the needs of your class and your schedule. Close with some sort of general considerations, regardless of what kind of simulation you are using, and regardless of sort of what context. There's a few things I think are really helpful to keep in mind. We'll talk about those, and then finally, we will have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions that come up at any point during the next half hour, please don't hesitate to head to that Q&A function in the Zoom toolbar, type them in, and when we get to that point in the evening, I will work through them and answer just as many as I can. All right, so let's dive in. I'm sure we all have run into situations where we have students who've encountered misinformation or disinformation, and it is so, so important. I know you'll all agree to try to equip our students to counter that, especially in global affairs education. And so we at CFR Education, we aim to close that global literacy gap in our country. And in particular, we focus on the knowledge, skill, and perspective that high school and higher education students need in order to understand and engage with today's most pressing global issues. Um, and I think one of the great things about CFR education simulations is they really do hit all three of these aspects of global literacy. Whatever case study you choose, whatever example you're working with, students are going to build some knowledge, both about a particular case study, but also about some of the underlying concepts and themes related to that case study that they can transfer to other uses. They're also going to build a ton of skills. All kinds of communication skills, written communication, verbal communication. They may do some research. They have to do critical thinking and analysis of different arguments and listening to what colleagues have to say. They're gonna have to collaborate, convince other students of their point of view while actively listening to what others have to say. All of these are such key skills for, I'm sure, anything that any of us is teaching. And then, of course, perspective. It's all about, they're able to, in simulations, both they're asked to take the perspective of someone who's actually making policy decisions about foreign policy issues. And they also, in the process of engaging in that simulation, are going to have to understand and think through the perspectives of the other students and the roles that they're filling that are seated around the table with them. So such a rich activity for building global literacy. So we at CFR Education leverage best pedagogical practices, and we combine that with the expertise of the Council on Foreign Relations. For those who don't know, we're a over 100-year-old, nonpartisan, non-governmental, independent think tank. We combine that expertise with pedagogical best practices, and all of our resources are barrier-free. We have great readings, videos, timelines, interactives, and charts on all these topics that you can see on the screen and more. We're particularly proud this fall. We've been rolling out a number of new resources about climate change. They're really fantastic. Some of my favorite videos are the still from one on the right explaining the Paris Agreement, which is really the key climate change treaty right now. And as you can see, great infographics about some of the mechanics of climate change and more. So check those out if you're curious. I'm sure my colleague is dropping a link in the chat right now. We, of course, have simulations. I'm going to talk about these in much more detail in a few minutes. And all of this comes with comprehensive teaching resources, lesson plans for use in the high school classroom, essay and discussion questions, both at the high school and the higher ed level, activities, sample syllabi, book guides for using books from CFR in the classroom. And then we also offer events, webinars, we attend conferences, and we offer professional development events just like this one. So if this is helpful to you or you want to explore what else we have to offer, head to our website and find out. So let's dive in. We'll start with our extended simulations. All right. The example I wanted to use tonight is the North Korean nuclear threat. It's one of our most popular, and a couple of things I want to point out. First of all, you can see at the top of the screen, it says NSC. So our extended simulations come in two flavors. We have National Security Council simulations, where students play the role of advisors to the President of the United States. They imagine they're on the National Security Council, the NSC. They research, they think about what they think the United States should do. They advise the president makes a decision. We also have UN simulations, where students represent the countries that sit on the UN Security Council. They work together to draft a resolution and then vote on that resolution. Many of our simulations, including this one, come in both flavors. Other simulations come just in one of those two flavors. So as you are scrolling through some of the different simulations, you'll see in the title, they'll either say NSC for that US National Security Council, or they'll say UNSC for United Nations Security Council. The second thing I want to point out, well, a couple other things I want to point out. Right here at the bottom of the screen, you can see the heart of the simulation is really what we call the decision point. There's something that has happened that our students have to respond to. Now, it comes with all kinds of background information and history and context and detail and places to research to get more information. But the heart of the simulation is some sort of decision point. Something has happened that forces our students, our policymakers, what they're pretending to make a decision. In this case, that decision point is that North Korea has reportedly acquired the ability to hit North America with a nuclear weapon. And so that's sort of the crisis, the emergency that has hit students as they sit around the table, and they have to decide, what are we going to do about this? How should we respond? What should we do? Now, before you get too excited, I will point out this is a completely fictional simulation. So far as we know, North Korea does not actually have missile technology at the United States. But it's a realistic potential near future situation. So this particular simulation is fictional, and it's set sort of in the present day. Think of it as like something we could wake up to this news tomorrow, next month, something like that. We do have other simulations that are historical. And they're set at a particular time in the past. And as you're looking through lists of simulations, your clue there is that it'll have the date in the title of the simulation. We'll look at some examples later. So I'm going to click right through to the page for this simulation. Before I do, if you are interested in finding our simulations, the easiest way to go is if you head to our website and click on this Teach button at the top of the page, pick a topic that you're interested in and click through, and you'll find the simulations listed there for that particular topic. All right. So when you first head to a simulation, you're going to end up on what we call the educator overview page. And this has really got all the information that you might want in order to make a decision. Hey, is this the right simulation for me, for my classroom, for my students right now? And so there's a couple of things I'll point out. First of all, there's a great big video here. The videos are great. They're less than 5 minutes. They kind of lay out the basics of the case. It can be a great way to get a good handle on sort of what is this case all about. And it's also right at the top of what you're going to give students as well to help get them engaged. We scroll down a little bit and see the case overview. This is what we were looking at a minute ago. It says it's fictional, set in the present day, kind of explains the situation, and then lays out the decision point in detail. We also have listed the learning goals that we had in mind when we were designing this. You can see are these learning goals that line up with some of the things you're hoping your students are going to walk away with at the end of your course. In this case, helps students will understand history behind U.S. North Korean tensions. They'll understand the threat posed by North Korean nuclear weapons, and they'll evaluate some of the options the United States has in order to address that threat. So all great, options for history classes, security studies classes, any number of topics. We also list out some concepts and issues that are covered, right? Obviously, this is the case about nuclear weapons and about North Korea, but it does cover some other topics as well that might not be immediately obvious from the title, right? It talks about alliances. It's a big part of the US calculus in this region of the world, for example. We talk about deterrence and sanctions. Those end up being a couple of the keys to the policy options to respond to this, and then look at some of the issues as well. And so all of this is to help you to get a sense of like, how is this going to fit into my curriculum? What does this have to offer to my students? And we have a little bit of commentary about what the students might be thinking about. What are the policy options they're going to be presented with? What are some of the considerations they'll have to think about when they're deciding, hey, what are we going to do about this intelligence that we've just received about North Korea? A couple other things you'll see there are some great guides and tips how to run the simulation, tips for the role play, which is what we call that portion where they're actually sitting around the table discussing. Um, Flashpoints are great to sort of bring a little bit of extra zest to your discussion. If you've got some time to work with and you want to introduce new information in the middle of a conversation to keep your students on their toes, that's what the flashpoints are for. And then the assessment section has information. We have some sample quizzes if your students need a little reading quiz to help them keep them honest with their research, information about the writing that they'll do, and sample rubrics. One of the big questions is, how do you grade this stuff? And so we have some sample rubrics for how you might choose to assess students' learning as they work their way through this simulation. Okay. So this is all on the educator side. This is for you as an educator to get organized, get prepared, pick out which simulation you want. Once you're ready to go with your students, you'll see this big button here that says go to student-facing simulation. And this is the page you're going to put on your LMS, email to your students, however you communicate with them. And this lays out all the information that your students need in order to engage in the simulation. Again, here's that video right up front. Like I said, less than 5 minutes, gives a good summary of the big picture, what students have to think about. It's a great entree to the simulation. The NSC guide, and again, this is an NSC case, so it's the NSC guide. Obviously, if this were a UN Security Council case, it'd be a guide to the UN Security Council. Takes you and your students through how does the NSC work? How do they make decisions? Who sits on it? Your students are maybe not 100% sure, hey, what's the difference between the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? This is the place to go that will help them. And then we have what are called the case notes. This is the background history of North Korea and the United States, understanding about nuclear weapons and missiles and things you need to know in order to think about this intelligence that's been received and how to make some decisions about it. The preparation and role play is what really where students become more active. There's a whole section on roles. So as you assign students a role, so one student will be the Secretary of State, another student will be the Secretary of Defense, someone else, maybe the Secretary of the Treasury, explains to them what their role is and gives them some sort of questions to consider as they think about how they're going to approach this role. The guide to the memorandum takes them through writing a position memo. In this case, in the UN Security Council, it's a little bit different because we're working towards a written document. But again, there's a memorandum that they'll work on they go home, do their research, write the memo to get them ready for the discussion. And then you have the guide to the role play. Student, walks students through how to actually sit around the table, have the discussion, and in this case, come to a decision about how they want to advise the president. Or in the UN Security Council, how do they come together on a resolution and then have a vote on it? We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And then the wrap up is, I think, a really important part of the simulation. After students have finished debating, after they've made their recommendation or they've held their vote, It's really important for them to step back, step out of the shoes of the cabinet member or the country they've been representing, and take a moment to reflect on what happened in the simulation and what did they learn as a result of that, as a result of what happened. And we have some great prompts for them as they think about, what did I learn about the topic? What did I learn about North Korea? What did I learn about nuclear weapons? What did I learn about how policy gets made? And what did I learn about how do I convince other people and understand what other people need and want? So really, really rich part of the simulation as well is important. Let me not skip over. And then student resources has additional, students need more guidance on research, or they need other resources, more detailed explanation of how to write the memo. Those kinds of things can all be found there. So let's hop back over to the slideshow. They said the role play is sort of the heart of what we're working towards. So students may spend, if you're in college, maybe they're going to do all the reading and watch the video in one night, write their position memo, and they're going to come into class ready to have this discussion. If you're in high school, maybe that's a 2-day process. They do some reading the first night, come into class the next day. You help scaffold the beginning of their position memo. They finish it up at home, and then they come in on day 3 ready to have the discussion, have the role play. This is what we recommend. Obviously, you can tweak it if you like to run things differently in your classroom, but we found that this is pretty successful. We put students through 3 rounds. They start sort of opening statements, go around the table. Everybody gets a chance to speak, get out there. What are your recommendations? What do you think at first blush should be the recommendation of the president? Or if it's the UN, what does your country think that the UN Security Council should do? From there, it becomes more of a debate. And again, the key here is not to win. The key is to get to a good answer. I think that's really important. And students, are called on by the National Security Advisor. That could be you as the teacher, or it could be you could assign a student to facilitate the discussion part. Pros and cons, start to work through different options, talk about where there's agreement, talk about where there's still disagreement, and work through that. And then we recommend a 3rd round of closing statements. Having had all that conversation, where does everybody net out? In the case of the NSC, there's not a formal vote, right? At the end of the day, there's one vote. It's the president. What the president wants to do, that's what's going to happen. But the president may ask for sort of what's everyone's last best recommendation. And then the president makes a call about what they want to do. And again, that president could be you. You could assign a student or a small team of students to be the president so that they can have that experience of sort of receiving the advice and then trying to decide, filter through it all, and come up with what they want to do. But as you can see, there's a whole chart here. This is just a screenshot off the website that you and the students will have in front of you, that you can work through some suggestions about how to do it, suggestions for timing, of how to sort of space out the time that you spend on each round. And there's a similarly detailed chart for the UN Security Council cases as well. Obviously, North Korea is not the only topic that we have extended simulations about. We have a great variety of topics, a variety of world regions. We've got something from every continent, and a variety of foreign policy issues. So in addition to sort of that hard security question about nuclear weapons, you can see we've got a cyber attack. We've got humanitarian issues. We have climate change, migration, lots of variety here. As I said before, we have both NSC and UN Security Council versions. You can see in the title, this one is an NSC, this one is a United Nations Security Council, and they're both historical and present day. So you can see, again, cyber clash here. This is a present day one. But here, humanitarian intervention in South Sudan in 2014, there's your clue that this is a historical one. The Korean War in 1950 is a very historical one. So lots of variety here. We really hope there's something that is a good fit for you, your needs, and your class. So there's the extended simulations. Mini simulations. Sometimes you don't have 2, 3, 4 days to devote to a simulation, but you still want to give students, a good opportunity for active learning. So we came up with mini simulations. This is an extremely popular topic right now. Should the United States ban TikTok? Um, we wrote this before the United States actually got around to banning TikTok, but I think it remains very relevant, and the questions remain, an open debate. Similar to extended simulations, you've got a title, tells you what it's all about, a quick overview, and a learning goal, and then we dive right in. The situation is like those case notes. It's the context. It's the background. What is TikTok? Why are we worried about it? What's ByteDance? How's China involved? But as you can see, easily readable in one sitting for students, pretty quick. And then we move right on to the decision point. In this case, it's, hey, should we pass a law banning TikTok, or should we, use an executive order? And then, just like in the full simulations, offers some policy options. In this case, we have three. Pressure ByteDance to sell. Do we threaten a ban? Do we not do either of those things and focus on some regulation? And I'll say a couple of things. One, we intentionally try to have three or sometimes four policy options, because it helps students to see that things are not just black and white. If we have two students who line up one side or the other, yes, no, becomes a very kind of straightforward, simplistic conversation. We always try to go for three and sometimes four, and can help students to see that there's nuance, there's pluses and minuses to each. It's very intentional. Also, don't feel constrained by these, right? It may be easiest to structure your discussion for students to structure themselves around who likes one, who likes two, who likes three. Let's talk about why. But if they have other options, if they want to get creative, they want to mash together parts of two and parts of three, they want to come up with a completely new idea and explain why, that's fantastic. And if you have a little bit of time, if students, especially maybe if they've seen one before and it's their second or third time through, can come up with some really interesting, thought-provoking ideas, which is always great. The last thing I'll say about mini simulations is, well, second to last thing I'll say about mini simulations. For all of them, we have just a couple of additional resources, right? Those extended simulations, we've got a whole bibliography if students want to dive deeper and do more research. Here we just grab 3 links, usually fairly short, news articles, opinion pieces, if you want to enrich the conversation a little bit. But you can have a great conversation just by reading what's on this webpage. In terms of the discussion, you certainly can set it up just like the extended simulations, where you give each student a role, and they have to read and consider the policy options from the point of view of the cybersecurity advisor or the Secretary of Treasury or the Secretary of State. But I will also say, like, if you have a routine in your class of how you do discussions, if you have, a protocol for small group discussions that report out to the class, if that works really well for you, you can probably just drop this reading into that system, and have a really successful class as well. So both are certainly options. Let's head back, to the slides. And again, if you want to check out more options for this, again, head to our website, click on this Teach button, pick a topic that looks interesting to you, whatever it might be, history, economics, global health, click through and you'll see the list of simulations for that topic. Obviously, TikTok is not the only thing we have a simulation about. We have a whole bunch of current events, cover all different world regions, different foreign policy issues. And again, some are historical, some are present day, some are sort of fictional, future looking things. Others are very, very real in the news. So a really great variety. We have a bigger library of mini simulations. So we've got anything from very much in the news. What should policy towards Taiwan be? More evergreen topics about, how are we gonna deal with owning space? Looking at, we put this out during the beginning of the COVID pandemic, thinking about, hey, how do we do this better next time? Stopping deforestation in the Amazon is one of my favorites. combines some climate change questions with also some sovereignty questions. Because of course the Amazon is, it's under some interpretations very much an internal question for Brazil. And what can the rest of the world do about the rising rate of deforestation in the Amazon? Great topics here. And you can see some are historical too. Looking at Red Lion Syria at the beginning of the Syrian civil war. Um, Speaking of history, if you teach history, especially US history, we have a whole series of simulations from US history. Um, this is a great way if you're teaching a straightforward survey course, you teach AP US history, and you want to bring some of the foreign policy questions that come up in your syllabus to life. Um, you can do so. These are supported by primary sources related to the topics rather than news articles like we do for the present day topics. And so are a great way to bring some more color to the run up to the War of 1812 or the run up to the War of 1898. And of course, they're not all wars either. We look at the influenza pandemic. That was relevant in the last few years for sure, or immigration from Cuba, which has been an ongoing issue for decades. So, some great options here as well. Let me just close with a couple of general considerations as you plan and run simulations. You get pushback or you're worried, are these going to really fit my standards, my curriculum goals? Remember those skills. All of us need to be building the kinds of skills that simulations build. Communication, writing, research, making an argument, analyzing others' arguments. It's also great for building habits of mind, that active listening and curiosity about what others have to say, and that understanding and appreciation of nuance in complex questions. So really great reasons to be using these. Even if maybe the exact topic of the simulation, even if nuclear weapons is not on your syllabus specifically, I'm sure that some of these skills and habits of mind are in your course goals. Second thing I'll say, consider giving your students some choice. Maybe you let them loose on our website and pick something they're interested in, or maybe you pick, 3 or 4 options that you're comfortable with and that fit your needs, and then let them choose from that more limited menu. It's a great way to give students more of a sense of control and agency over what they're learning about, helps them be more engaged. And what is, let's face it, is a little bit of a structured activity that you're laying out for them. So giving them some of that control on the front end can really help. And then the last thing, I mentioned this before, but debrief. So much of the crucial learning that happens with simulations comes in that metacognition step, that thinking about learning, thinking about their own thinking that comes afterwards as they sort of reflect on what was it like to be having this debate. What did I learn when I was thinking like the Secretary of State? What was hard about that? What was easier than I thought it would be? Those kinds of questions are so valuable in sort of consolidating students' learning from engaging in simulations. So I'm going to pause there. If you want to learn more, there's our website, education.cfr.org. Go check it out. I know also my colleague has been dropping links all through the meeting in your chat box. If you'd like to sign up for our email newsletter, you'll hear about new resources, and we highlight things over the course of the year that we hope will be helpful, useful for you. You can scan that QR code. You can follow us on social media or send us an email if you have questions about simulations or you just want to tell us how it went. We'd love to hear from you. You can message us on social media or at that email address. But now, as promised, let's take a look and see what questions we've got. I realize I have about 1 minute left. I promised half an hour. I'm good to keep going and answering questions. But also know if you have to run, we are going to send you a recording afterwards. So it looks like I have to exit out of my slideshow in order to see the questions. Okay. Barbara asked, what do you mean all our resources are barrier free? Great question. First of all, you don't need to pay us any money. everything is completely free. You don't need to deal with a purchase order, write a check, whatever. Secondly, you do not need to set up a login or anything. So you don't need to set up accounts. You don't need to give us your email address. You don't need to get your students to sign up for an account because we all know how arduous that can be. Um, Everything is right there on our website, free, no login to use. We want to make this as easy as possible for folks to use and to get going in their classroom. If you have other questions, please throw them in the Q&A function. I'm just going to skim through the chat quickly to see what folks have been talking about. Someone used the Zimmerman Telegram recently. That's awesome. So great to see folks. Oh, okay. Any other questions? I'll hang on for a minute. Anybody comes up with any other questions? Do you have any activities that relate to the process of peacemaking? Ooh, that's a good question. Um, well, I think the one of those extended simulations that we were looking at about humanitarian intervention in South Sudan is a lot about like how to maintain the peace in the wake of the civil war there, which is a great question. Just trying to think, we have any mini simulations about that? None that immediately come to mind, but let me keep thinking and we will grab your email and let you know if we come up with anything else. Um, we will send out the recording video links. I don't know if we're going to send the slide deck, but there'll certainly be the video of the slide deck so you can take a look. We have this sort of by class size. So all of them are organized to be flexible. We don't, we have a certain number of roles that are there, but we think, you can always just add some other people who are just sort of general advisor of some sort. We also, there's some ways that you can go where you have, maybe have two students work together. So you have a two-headed Secretary of State, a two-headed Secretary of Defense. So there's some good flexibility there for classes of different sizes. If you need some more advice, if you've got a weird sized class, feel free to email us and we can chat about it. If you've got a super big class, you've got 100 students in a lecture or something, you might want to split them in two, something like that. So other languages such as Spanish, no, unfortunately not. We do have a video game that's available in Spanish, which covers some of the same learning goals, but not the simulations themselves. I think those requirements to participate in simulations, these are free for anybody to use. So, if you as an educator want to use them, it's up to you. If your students, if you want to use them with your students, it's your judgment whether students are ready to use it. Let's see, semester long UN simulation integrates. Austin, that's a good question. I do know folks who have sort of stretched out a simulation over the course of a whole semester, kind of take their time and fill in other things. We don't have anything written up about that on our website, but happy to chat if that's something you're interested in. I think it's certainly adaptable to that. Let's see. Oh, got a couple more in the Q&A. Is there a company who I might use to develop simulations for me? I don't know. We develop all of these in-house. Our team works on these in collaboration with CFR fellows, and we just produce them for our own website for our own use. So I'm not sure where to point you if you're looking for custom built stuff. If you have suggestions, feel free to share them. We might build them, but of course, a lot depends on our schedule, our time, everything else we've got going on. But we always welcome suggestions if there's a topic you think would be useful to teachers in general. Have you had success with these simulations in fully online classes? Yes. To be perfectly honest, we originally envisioned these as face-to-face sitting around the table. But COVID happened, people used them on Zoom face to face in a Zoom room, and had fairly good success. Um, I think that probably the role play works better if everyone can be there at the same time synchronously in a Zoom room together. Um, but I imagine it is possible to adapt them to some sort of a bulletin board discussion board feature on an LMS. I don't think I know of anybody who's done that specifically, but I can imagine it working. If you want to try it out, would love to maybe work with you and see how it goes and offer some suggestions. And if it goes well, we can share what we learn. Um, do you have simulations for different subjects? Not sure exactly what we mean by subjects. I mean, so all of our everything is global affairs issues of one kind or another. Um, but some of them do overlap a little bit. For example, the climate change policy could be interesting in an earth science class. The cyber clash, which is about a cyber attack, could be interesting to like a computer science class that has some elements of thinking about sort of policy and politics around computer science and cybersecurity issues. So in that sense, I think there is some variety, but I think the majority of our users are in social studies classrooms of one kind or another. But I think within that we have a really wide variety. Like I said, they're not all security, we're about to get hit by a nuclear bomb kinds of questions. There are economic ones, and climate policy is very much about kind of sort of economic and social aspects. There's humanitarian topics as well. So some good options. All right. That I think is all the questions that I see. Um, so unless anything else pops up in the next couple minutes, I just want to thank everybody again for joining us. I hope this was really helpful. Like I said, please feel free to, I'll pull this slide back up. Please feel free to reach out to us, send us pictures and stories on social media or by email of how things went. We'd love to hear about folks engaging in great learning in the classroom. And likewise, feel free to reach out if you have questions. You will get a recording. Feel free to pass that on to colleagues tomorrow. It'll also be posted on our website if you want to direct colleagues to check it out later. It should be available on our website, education.cfr.org. And with that, go eat that last slice of Thanksgiving pie, get ready for class tomorrow, whatever you need to do. Stay warm out there. It is truly December. And have a great evening. Thanks so much for joining us.